Anyway.
I'm just trolling you.
It's a small crowd. Hey guys, just a quick standard now. So we've got 2 after-hours activities going on tonight. One is the new Slide Is It Anyway, which is like it's like hacker karaoke for slide presentations. We're looking for extra people to sign up for that. Sign up is at the table. It's a really great time. And then after that, we're doing drunk debates, which is exactly what it sounds like. We got a bunch of people on stage who've been drinking for quite a while, and we pick random topics and let them duke it out. And also we swap out panel members with people from the audience at regular intervals. So it's just absolute chaos and hilarious. Recommend you guys check it out. All that's starting about 10 o'clock tonight in the other room. More importantly, make sure when you guys are leaving your hotel rooms, if you're staying here, to pull the door closed. There's like a weird negative pressure inside the room that's keeping the doors from closing early, and I found like 3 on the way down. So make sure you're dry. I know we're all security people, but we're also drinking a lot. So if your door is open, I assume that that's an open invitation to take your booze. So just putting it out there. Without further ado, here's Mark with a personal favorite topic of mine. I've been doing this since way before Shodan existed, with like NetBus and that izon surveilling IP camera security.
Makes sense. Hello, everyone. So, before you start drinking your hearts away and your livers, we'll get some more, computer stuff in. So, anyone happen to have an izon or had one before I released this research back in October? Okay. So, izon is a camera that has been around, I think, been around 3 or 4 years now, actually. And a lot of the people that were part of the team that created it were actually former Mac accessory guys through and through, whether it was audio or just other kinds of Mac accessories. So really, really good breed of design, which, I think it's a pretty cool camera, actually, and that's why I bought it originally. One of those things, though, it's like many things these days, although 4 years ago this was a little bit more interesting, completely mobile enabled. It doesn't have a web interface natively for you to use as an end user. You set it up with the camera. You actually use a QR code that we'll show you in a second to scan and all that to pair it. But very simple device, very broad, obviously, between distribution for countries and also distribution through the channels. Interestingly enough, Apple stopped selling this camera recently, and not sure why that is. I don't know if it's related to this at all, but who knows. Easier question, how many people have a Raspberry Pi? Okay, a few more people, there you go. So I bought a Raspberry Pi a while back and set it up with Linux, set up SSH, threw it on my network and completely forgot to set a static IP. So I didn't know what it was, so like most people I just nmap my network and try to figure out where this Raspberry Pi went. And when I scanned my network, I became horrified to find this giant list of ports that I had no idea why they were on this device, what they did, et cetera, et cetera. Most importantly, I saw Telnet. And if it's 2013 at the time and you see Telnet on your network and you didn't willingly put Telnet on your network, you probably should look into that just for what it's worth. So this was the list of ports I saw pop up on this one device. Very quickly, assessed that, hey, I think the one giveaway is the RTSP, which is a streaming protocol. So I assumed, hey, it's probably video related. I only have one camera on my network, so that's probably what it is. But certainly enough ports for anyone to kind of be worried about, especially all those TCP ports doing God knows what in the high range. So if you have a device, and really, I was just chatting with my buddy earlier, like the one thing that I think gets lost in a lot of security talks is actually methodology and how you go about doing what you're doing. So when I knew this camera existed, and I knew it had Telnet, and I knew I wanted to do horrible things to it, I decided, hey, I should make a kind of a wish list of what those horrible things might be. So obviously, if it's Telnet, I think everyone would think, get a shell, right? Get root, hopefully. That would be ideal, and have that remote access. But other things, if it's running a web service, we saw a couple web service ports. If it has RTSP, what about the streaming protocol? What does that mean for us, and what access can we get for the video? And then the device itself, any embedded device has a few, core tenets, firmware obviously being one of them, and then other aspects of it's a camera, so it probably stores data or sends data. How do we intercept that or do things related to the camera storage? So again, the entire setup is actually done just with your mobile app. It is an iOS-only device, so you have your mobile app, you have your camera, you scan a QR code that you've basically encoded with your SSID and WPA2 key or whatever. And this screenshot, when I was putting this deck together a while back, I was kind of lazy and didn't want to just take a screenshot off my phone or something. I don't know why I didn't do that, but so I did a Google image search like most do, and I found this QR code. And I was like, hey, what's interesting is this QR code's like from their marketing materials. I wonder what the QR code says. So I looked at the QR code. I know it's a little hard to see, but the actual network is actually STEM Office 136, and STEM Innovation is the company that makes this camera. And then the password is We Live Apple. So I've never, gone out to, I think, where they're based in Utah. But if you drive by their office ever and happen to see this SSID, you might want to try that password. So multicast DNS is one thing that you'll see with a lot of embedded devices. Generally, if you have something you pop on your network and it needs to be set up, multicast DNS is a very quick way to help that pairing process get rolling. We see this with, of course, IP cameras, but things like printers, like DSLR cameras that have Wi-Fi modules, many similar uses like that. So one thing that we can notice quickly is just some basics about what that camera is. So it has an ARM chip, which isn't super surprising, and it's running Linux, which also isn't super surprising. That's going to be the case most of the time when we're looking at devices like these. One thing I saw initially, though, when I was starting to look at this network traffic with the camera is I did see when you basically bootstrap the camera and start it up for the first time after a factory reset, it sends over this RSA pub key. Now, if you see a public key going over the network from a device like a camera, you're like, oh, that's good for them. It seems like they're going to transmit this to me, that then I can encrypt data and send data back over and have some integrity to this process. We'll talk about that in just a second. The one thing that we do see, and I do mean the one thing that we do see, is the admin password. When it's generated, it actually comes over and it's encrypted, and assumably it's encrypted with, with that pub key to be then delivered and decrypted with the private key on the other side. So you're basically doing a secure transfer of that generated admin password from one side to the other. So, and that's perfectly reasonable. That's a good use of crypto and a pretty common way to do things. To jump ahead just slightly, and you guys already know this talk's going to go downhill for them for security, so I'm not really spoiler alerting too much. But one little list of ideas that you should probably know about as well is the camera can only be attached to one account at a time. That means if, like my wife, she can't have the camera attached to her account and my account at the same time, which means you have to have shared credentials if you want to have access to this camera, which is never a good thing. When the device resets, though, and goes to factory mode, these are some of the process output on the camera. And I really like this part because it's the most literal thing ever. It's been factory reset, complete _ reset. Like very few things in software is ever that straightforward on what it's actually doing. So I found that amusing. But the other thing to know is the admin password. If you do end up changing that password, everything breaks and it gets really, really unhappy with you. So in terms of what you could do to access this camera, there's certainly a very broad way, number of ways you could go through trying to gain access. And it depends how much time you want to spend. You could go the route of, hey, I know this runs some web software. Let's try to, exploit the CGI app and try to get remote code execution or something, right? Okay, that's one route. Because the admin password's going over the wire encrypted, that seems like a bad idea. Even though you might not want to use 1024-bit RSA to do certain things, I wasn't too concerned like I would actually want to go down that road. It just seemed like a fool's errand to try to brute force that, because it could be a 5-digit or a 5 alphanum type password. It could be 100 digits or something. I don't know. So why waste time? There's got to be a better way. Looking at the traffic, you can actually see that it's doing HTTP digest mode for all of the actual HTTP calls. And the thing about digest mode that you need to know effectively is a bunch of data is public about those operations, like a bunch of the data coming over those connections is public, and it's all clear, clear text. The one thing that matters is when you actually compute the digest of that transaction, unless you know the secret key that's actually creating that key digest basically, you can't do anything. So again, if we don't have the password, we have nothing with that. Telnet, trying to brute force that, sure, we have network access to it, but connectivity issues, if there's any throttling built in, if the device just melts because I'm hitting it too hard, there's a lot of downsides to that. It's not like I'm doing a local attack against like a password hash. It's not necessarily going to be fast or that good of an idea, and I'm also super impatient. And hardware modification is not something I'm super familiar with. I've learned a little bit since then, but it's also not, at that time, the cup of tea. So things I do know about, we'll talk about a little bit. Decrypting apps. Decrypting apps is something that's very easy to do with a jailbroken phone. You can do this the hard way using GDB and you're going through a couple steps. But there are apps like Clutch or Aristocrack that will do the decryption for you. Because when you submit an app to the App Store, it's actually encrypted binary effectively. And when your phone runs, of course, to run that app, it has to decrypt that. Otherwise, it wouldn't be able to do anything. So effectively what you're doing, and the GDB route, you effectively short-circuit that and say, oh, the app is running, and therefore I'm going to dump memory and then save this unencrypted binary. Now I have the app. So you can actually automate that very quickly. And once you have the app, it's kind of a crapshoot as to if you'll find anything interesting. Lucky for me, I found very interesting stuff in that mobile app. And this is where stuff starts getting terrifying. So if you are super pro, you might use IDA to look at stuff like this, or Hopper on Mac or something else. Or also, if you're like me and sometimes just want to get some ASCII, strings is perfectly acceptable too to find data. So the top one is kind of more broken out, but the bottom one I think is more salient. That bottom image actually shows a bunch of content from this mobile app, all of which is effectively one giant shell script. And what that shell script's effectively doing is it's the shell script that will kind of bootstrap the firmware upgrade process. And in order to do that, it actually connects to Telnet as root and then basically cats out a bash script to start this firmware upgrade process. That is how this camera was designed to upgrade itself with the mobile app. So you effectively have, just because the script's in there in ASCII, of course, you have the root username and the root password, not just for my camera, but for all of the cameras, right? So this falls under the guise of not a default password, but a hard-coded password. And sometimes people conflate the two. The default password would be like your Linksys router has admin or something, right? Well, in this case, I don't know if I'm a consumer and end user. I don't know that there's an admin root account on this camera. I certainly don't probably know what the hell Telnet is, right? So in this case, there's nothing I could do about that as a consumer. I'm just up, I'm lost, basically, that this is a hidden value and there's nothing I can do about it. So as soon as we get a root login, obviously you're going to log in, grab your shell and do a little dance. So there's the screenshot that everyone takes when they get root on anything. So one other detail we see effectively is just kind of what kernel they're running. We already knew it was ARM. We already knew it was Linux. So it just gives us a little more detail. Of course, the actual network services is kind of interesting. We knew about most of those because, of course, they're mapped publicly. Some of the TCP services running are not public, so there's kind of a mixture there. But it gives more clarity into how this camera is running. And certainly there's a lot of software on these devices that make all the different aspects of an IP camera stream and saving files and encoding and all this other stuff work. That stuff's cool. I didn't really take too much of a look at that, other than what I needed to really keep breaking stuff. So the shadow file on this was actually using Descrypt, which no one should be using Descrypt past like 1998. So this is a very common scenario where organizations will get like standard firmware from some Chinese ODM and never ever look at it, never interrogate it, never patch it or update it or anything else. And the admin password, the /admin/ and then Merlin, Those are actually hard-coded passwords that come with this firmware. I had someone else reach out after someone saw this talk, and they said, hey, I know that username and password. And they actually showed me the exact firmware that this device runs that was just open, to the public from a distributor. But those are hard-coded passwords in many devices, not just this device. Stem root, of course, is a custom one for the root password, but not a very good one either. Certainly, I probably could have telnet, brute force telnet and gotten that password out without too much trouble. But the thing is, if it's a known quantity, it's like, oh, sure, I could have totally brute forced that. But again, if there was capitals in there or numbers in there or anything else, it would have taken me a long time. And if I didn't scope what character sets and stuff, so hindsight, right? In terms of how the web app is functioning for a lot of the core aspects of the camera, everything's running on Lighty, so pretty standard lightweight web server. Big fan personally, and because it's using Lighty, I had seen previously, if you go to the web, the web root, it would give you a basic authentication type screen. So I knew it was doing some sort of access control. It's just using HT password effectively, or HT access, if you will. And so I see a user and an admin, and I see a hash, and I could do an offline attack against those hashes and see if I can crack them, or I can just look around the file system and end up finding that there's a config file that has the clear text equivalents of those passwords. So that, again, much easier. I like to try to not waste my time on stupid shit. So in this case, you might see the one where it says user. That is another hard-coded password that the end user has no knowledge of, has no capability to change. The admin password, remember we talked slightly about the transfer of this this RSA encrypted packet that went over the wire. Well, again, had I tried to brute force that password, I probably would have been waiting a really long time. That's not a quick password to brute force, so I'm glad I didn't waste time there. But the user one's certainly interesting, and this is useful to think about, because remember I said there's a lot of ways to approach the problem of trying to get some access and do some cool stuff. In the case of user, had one of my routes been, hey, I should try to just do some sort of dictionary attack against this web server, I probably would have got in pretty quick. But again, you never know, and sometimes it's easier to go down the roads that are quick. Maybe they won't be successful, but at least don't spin your wheels more than you have to. So the camera runs a full the full web server, but it actually has a full web app that actually does basically everything and more that the mobile app does for you. And in fact, a lot of what the mobile app's doing is actually just proxying through commands to this backend web interface and then spitting stuff out into the iOS app. So very inelegant. It's not like a RESTful API or anything sexy. It's like, hey, I'm going to send an HTTP call at this web app, and it'll send some data back and see what happens. Getting back to what consumers know versus what they don't know, again, this is not a documented thing. At no point in time does any documentation say, hey, you have a web server running on this camera. Hey, if you want to log in, do this. You as a consumer never know that. When you log in with the user credentials, unlike certain privilege levels that we might see on devices like this, where they might really restrict and par down what you can do, the user level basically lets you do any read operation more or less, but no write operations for the most part. And in this case, you can watch the video, you can listen to audio, you can make it streaming video, streaming images. There's actually a Flash interface in here. You can also see, most interestingly enough, you can also see the API keys for all the third-party services that this camera is using. So even though you have this user login and you can't change settings on the camera with it, you can get the API keys to which you could then just communicate directly to these third-party services and do whatever you want with those. You also have firmware details and configuration for things like motion alarms and sound alarms and stuff like that, which is, oh, there we go. Perfect. Within that suite of access that you have for the user, you can actually do things like do a wireless scan. So I don't know about you, I've definitely had neighbors in the past that would put stuff like their family's full name or their street address or their home address, like crazy stuff that no one in here would ever do, but we all have had neighbors that would do stuff like that. So playing, I guess, devil's advocate in this case, if I were, going on Shodan, looking at a bunch of cameras, grabbing IPs and all that jazz, Yeah, of course, with an IP, you get usually with like ARIN data, you can get a geolocation roughly. And then let's say you have another piece of data like a street address or a family name or something else, you actually might be able to work out where this remote camera actually is and who owns it and which house it is. So that's interesting. But it's more interesting because even with this user set of credentials, you can actually see where the motion alarms are, and you can see what the sensitivity of the audio alarms are. So maybe they turn off audio alarms because it was annoying because of their dog or something, right? But if I'm breaking into your house, I just have to stay below that line of boxes that are lit up, and the motion alarm will never go off. So this is good intel if you're going to break into someone's house and you already can see inside of their house to see if maybe someone's home or they had just left or something else. You can also enable this beautiful flash interface if you're so inclined. One thing to note, I mean, this camera is a good camera. The video quality is kind of passable, I guess, at the end of the day. But the audio, the stairway in the back is I don't know 20 some odd feet from where the camera is. And when I was doing some of the testing, like I could hear my wife watching TV upstairs. So the audio pickup's really good, which for you as a homeowner is a great thing, but also for criminals, an equally great thing. So a bit of an eye chart. Left side is just firmware details. Notably, there's a web interface to actually do the firmware updates. Now, of course, in this configuration, we don't have access to upload firmware. But remember that config file that we found, the Lua config file, had the admin password. So you could just telnet in, cat out the admin password from that file, log in as the admin to the web interface, and actually just pass it the URL of new firmware, and it would actually update for you just from the web interface. Very simple process. And one thing, I was recently out in Boston and at this IoT security event, and Dan Gear was talking, and he has this whole premise in one of, I guess, his latest brilliant thesis is having this like end of life built into embedded devices because they're so unmaintainable on the whole. And there's also the premise of how do you really verify integrity of something like this ever? Because you're trusting the device to tell you that it's up to date or it's safe or whatever the case might be. So if I update firmware on your device, I can just always turn off that it will never update firmware again and never override my settings. So once you have a device on your network like this, after you, and hopefully even by the time you get it to your house, after you open the box and put it on your network, you really can't for sure say probably that it's actually secure still, which has some concerning implications. You can also do cool things like flip LED lights on and off and freak people out. And the bottom right pane is just some details about the API stuff that we were talking about earlier, where you have access to these third-party services and can see details. Intellivision's one of the vendors that they were using. Intellivision is effectively where they're storing all of the videos for alerts. So if you had a motion or an audio alert, this is where they would upload the file. And Intellivision is just using Amazon S3 on the back end. So one other thing I'd like to talk about in kind of the scoping of IoT security and you as consumers is, when I bought this camera and set it up and created my account with this vendor, I never knew that I was going to be also a customer of Intellivision or these other ones I'll talk to you about. But I didn't know my data would go to S3. The assumption would probably be, hey, my data is probably going to the data center of my vendor. So just keep in mind as you're buying these things and transmitting data, unless it's spelled out very, very straightforward, you probably don't know how many vendors on the back end are actually getting your details, your data, and what happens if your vendor goes away or that third party breaks a contract. What does that mean for them to actually have your data anymore, or you having your data anymore? The files themselves in that Amazon S3 bucket where they are storing, one bucket. So if you're an AWS person, you know that you should generally segment user data out into multiple buckets and not have one giant bucket of all the data. They also weren't doing any form of access control other than the fact of a unique URL. So if you ever did see the URL, and by the way, all these API calls are clear text, and all the access to S3 was clear text. So if you were ever co-tenant on a network and man in the million Starbucks, you would see all this data flying by and have all this access anyways. There's no encryption done by the camera or the mobile app before this data is uploaded. So if you have a URL, you can download the file without question. There's nothing else to do. The one big caveat here, and the same boilerplate thing I say every single time is I found hard-coded credentials for AWS API keys in the mobile app. I never tested them because that would be a really, really obvious and blatant CFAA violation. However, contextually, let's keep in mind, one bucket, all the files go to that place. I have access to the camera, so I know the camera doesn't have any additional AWS keys, and I know the mobile app doesn't have any additional AWS keys. So if I'm going to make a bit of an inference, I would say that those keys probably ruled them all and would have probably given me access to all the files for all the users at one time. But the company never confirmed nor denied that that was the case when I told them, and subsequently that doesn't work the same way it used to, so hopefully they fix some stuff in there. Now, it's bad enough that your data wouldn't be encrypted when it's uploaded to this third-party service that you're not even aware of. It's also bad that the files weren't protected by access controls or credentials at all. But also, from the mobile app, because remember, everything's in the mobile app, I actually found that if you deleted a file using the mobile app, which is the only way to delete a file, it might actually not delete the file. I deleted a file from the mobile app. It was there 2 months later. I think I checked a couple more subsequent times, and it's one of those things where if you have a video that gets uploaded accidentally, you walk through your house, your dog barks, and you're naked. All right, you're like, oh, that's funny, haha, I'm going to delete this video off the internet. No, you might actually not delete the video off the internet. And not only are you not deleting it from the internet with your vendor, you're not deleting it with the third-party vendor who's then using another third-party vendor to store it. You have no idea that file is there. The only reason I know that file was there after the fact is because I knew what to look for and what URL to go to. And that was honestly kind of happenstance that I even realized that. So pretty terrifying when you think about where your data's at and what else is out there that you're unaware of and who has that. Yoix, UICS, they're the people that do the actual streaming. So if you're remote and you want to stream the video camera to your mobile app, they're the people that actually provide that service. The data that's being streamed, and this is where the web interface really comes in importantly. When you request actually accessing your camera, the way that works is that there's a daemon on the camera that's making a connection outbound to their streaming server, and then your mobile app is contacting the service provider, and all they're doing is basically proxying you. You are literally seeing this web interface effectively in your mobile app and just have no idea. And it's not like you're streaming video from their server. You're streaming video from your home, literally. It's just proxying it through their server. So in terms of network attacks, if they have an outbound TCP connection that you have direct access to a web server with, if you can find a vulnerability in that web service without knowing credentials or anything else, you could just break in and execute code or something and be on network and have co-tenancy with the rest of the network that this device is on. And a lot of IP and embedded type devices like cameras and similar are actually going about this in a similar way, which is terrifying. A more ideal way would be data streams outbound from your network to a third-party service or whatever, and then you connect to that service, and they're basically caching that data and streaming it live, not opening a proxy connection between your two networks. That's no bueno. Having that middle point that terminates those connections and doesn't let you back in the other way is a much better way to go. If you can see in the screenshot, and by the way, I regret cutting off the fact that it says HTTP, so it's not encrypted either. It has proxy9.yoix.net and then some high number port /mobileye. Those endpoints, assumably you can enumerate those. I never tried to actually see if I could see other people's cameras by enumerating those. Knock yourself out if you want to go down that road, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's one of those things, though, you, again, as an end user, do not know that you have this open connection for the internet to be inside of your house. Like, no one's told you that that's how this works. And so that's frustrating, and more frustrating, as I said, is it's not actually doing encryption. So if you are at Starbucks and you are streaming your video, that actually will not be encrypted, and someone can watch the video along with you. One other well, not one other, but a couple other aspects about Yoix. Getting back to password security and stuff like that, and data transfer and who owns your data and all this other stuff. When you sign up to STEM Innovation, they would actually give your password to a third party to create an account with a third party. So when we talk about like password breaches and people are like, well, I use like LastPass, so I manage, so I know like if X gets breached, I'll totally just get rid of that password. Well, a third-party vendor now has your unique password that you created for one service. So if they get breached and you don't know you're a customer of theirs, how safe are you now, right? So the LastPass model works really well when you have like a single password per service and randomized and all that, is that no one else actually uses that password for another account that can't be breached without your knowledge, hopefully. This completely ruins that premise. It actually takes your actual password, does an MD5 some of that password, and uses that as effectively like a secret token when it's doing API calls. So again, if someone's on the network with you, and again, all the API calls are clear text, they can get your MD5 some password, and if they want, just brute force that and start logging in as you. They don't have to go through all this like extra headache. They can just steal your password now from brute forcing or rainbow tabling, and just log into your account as if it was you on their own mobile app. So a couple examples of the API calls that they were doing. The bottom one will actually create a token, and then using that MD5 password, and then the token itself will come back, and you can then pass the MAC address to that device and start doing API calls to your heart's content. So what I did, like most people, I looked at Shodan, but what I did slightly different than what some people might have assumed. The data set's really small in terms of the number of devices. Part of that, I think, is market share. I know it's sold a lot of places, and I know it has like really good retail presence. However, keep in mind that in order to find these cameras, you would have to basically be port forwarding or have no firewall or some other combination that allows you to see telnet on the internet, which is kind of weird. However, the other thing I did is not look at HTTP, which probably would have been a little bit more likely to be on the network. There was really no consistent, unique signature for the HTTP server that I felt really confident about. So I took the thing that I felt most confident about, which was telnet, because the telnet banner was very unique. So at least I had a high assurance that that was a positive and not a false one. Again, this is from July 2013 when I was doing the actual research. So who knows what the number is now? And like I said, if you did HTTP and could verify with some reasonable integrity of your data without actually logging into people's networks, which is a bad idea, could be a much bigger number now. So wish list wise, we have access to all this stuff. The only thing I didn't test when I was doing this was vulnerabilities, like actually finding like, is this, and again, like there were a lot of CGI apps, so there probably were some null byte attacks and some other stupid stuff that would have worked. But in the case you start with root and you have firmware like upload access, like finding vulnerabilities is kind of not necessary at that point. It might be interesting, but I was kind of looking for big ticket stuff. So here's kind of the quick synopsis of all these issues. I think we talked about all of these at some point. Keep in mind, this is one IP camera. This is one Internet of Things. This is one embedded device on your network. And look how many vulnerabilities and how many service failures and third parties and all this other stuff were involved. And if you think of how many devices in the next few years you're going to be buying and putting on your network, your Nest or your TiVos or just all these different devices that are all network enabled and have some embedded hardware action going on, some Linux and all this other stuff. Each one of those is a target for bad stuff like this to happen. And thinking about what your how much risk do you really want to take? Because honestly, a lot of people are bringing stuff just like this into their offices, right? You want a cheap IP camera to bring to your office and put on your network, and maybe you're a healthcare provider now. Well, now you're a healthcare provider with a camera that has all these vulnerabilities, and in terms of HIPAA, that's probably not going to go over very well with people. In terms of the research subsequent, we'll talk about disclosure in a second, but there's some still room to do some other stuff on this camera if you're so inclined. Number one, of course, finding vulnerabilities in the actual apps on the camera. Remember that a lot of the code on those cameras are actually the third-party vendor's code to actually run their daemons and stuff. So it's kind of a bigger scope than just the camera itself, but could be interesting. Doing custom firmware, doing funny hacks, putting like a hat on someone when they walk by or something. There's a lot of room there if you're so inclined to do that kind of stuff. And the APIs, I really didn't look too hard at, mostly because most of the API testing would have had to involve things that probably would have been mostly illegal, so it seemed like a bad road to go down as well. Now, in terms of what the FTC thinks about stuff like this, if you ever heard about the TrendNet case where effectively there was a vulnerability, it was really gnarly in that you could just go to a URL and get direct access to IP cameras. Someone created a list of about 700 or so of these cameras, put them online, people started, posting to the Reddit and 4chan and all this other stuff, and that got the attention of a lot of news agencies, which in turn got the attention of the FTC. And subsequently, TrendNet got some pretty heavy restrictions and some other action against them because of their failure for security, which is good. People should be, somewhat chastised for huge failures like that, especially with regard to the privacy and safety of so many people. Now, in terms of the language, one of the restrictions was the FTC said that in marketing materials, TrendNet couldn't use effectively the phrase, this is secure, or the camera is secure, or security, or any of those kinds of offshoots. And if we look at the izon website, and this is, again, a little bit old now, that website, of course, said secure, bank security, grip military, all the kind of marketing stuff you guys see all the time. Now, I would contend that in terms of what TrendNet did wrong is it pales in comparison to me to how much bad stuff STEM Innovation did in their camera and complete failures of security. But again, I didn't try to put 700 people's lives in danger, so I guess it didn't make enough news. Disclosure timeline, pretty quick timeline. I actually had submitted this research to a couple conferences, so I had a firm end date of when this research would be released, unless someone directly asked me to redact something or hold back something or whatever else, which I'm always happy to do for a company if they're acting the right way about things. But for my very first email, I said, I have some security issues with the camera. I'd like to talk to your senior engineering team or someone else that can talk about these kinds of issues. Just so you know, I'm going to be releasing this research in October. So since email number 1, they knew that was basically the end date. Through all my weird email exchanges, and many of them were very weird, I really got pretty much nowhere until the 14th of October, when they kind of piped back up. And I was asked to have a conversation with them and talk about all these issues that I found. And they said oh, and your research is wrong, and this isn't right, and something, whatever else. And I'm a pretty humble guy, so if you say the research is wrong, I'd love to know what went wrong. But keep in mind, I have screenshots, I've tested things, I've seen results. I can confirm that data I deleted, it's still there. I can confirm that the root password is hard-coded into all your cameras. That's a very simple thing to do. So I think it might have been a little bit more posturing on their side than anything. But when I did offer to meet up and talk and all this other stuff, they never got back to me and still have never gotten back to me. So, oh well. Good news is, as far as I'm aware, all of the major vulnerabilities are patched, remediated, mitigated, or some other way been fixed. I don't use the camera myself anymore. I bought a different camera from a much better vendor for security, and so it's kind of the way that most things go. You put some time in, you try to get some results. Usually the results don't come out until way after you're frustrated with the vendor because they've stopped talking to you or threatened you or whatever else. So keeping in mind, Wi-Fi thermostats, Nest and stuff. I think Honeywell actually has their own kind of Nest-like thing coming out very soon. Cameras and light bulbs and all these cool things that we have that are internet-enabled or some way or another. Keep in mind, if that device communicates out of your network, maybe it's a reverse proxy. Who knows, right? You have to verify that yourself. Maybe it has hard-coded passwords. How do you know? Dumping firmware, going to mobile apps. This is stuff that, as consumers, you have really no insight into unless people like me or someone else in the room does research to tell you about the things that are on your device. So I would encourage you to look at devices like this. Certainly don't attack network services out of scope of your network. But if you have a network device and you're running Wireshark on your home network and you bought the hardware and stuff like that, reasonably assured that you won't get in too much trouble. Now, certainly I would talk to the vendor and be very kind, and you should always be courteous to people that you're working with for security research, because lawsuits are very easy for big companies to throw at you. So keep that in mind as well. But still never found the Raspberry Pi. I know it's there. I just completely stopped caring. And I mean, we're almost talking a year now, and I still don't know where that thing is. But this was a much more interesting project than I don't know what the hell I was going to use that thing for, a Tetranet server or something. So some quick shout outs. The folks, Quine's over with us now at Duo, so we stole him away, but Octavat Labs guy let me use their cluster for password cracking to get that one admin password, so I didn't have to burn up my CPU for that. Jono and Adam at Duo for some guidance on stuff, and then my buddy Martin at Duo actually let me use his jailbroken iPhone. I love how the one jailbroken iPhone we had at a security company belonged to the video editing guy at our company. Like, we have subsequently bought our own jailbroken iPhone for testing. So, so contact details, please reach out to me. I'm sure you guys will have the recording after the fact if you want to kind of double back, but slides are at Speaker Deck. My personal website, uncompiled.com, has a bunch of other security decks and other cool stuff. And then in terms of, I guess, time, I actually finished pretty early. So I have 10 minutes for questions. If we don't need that, we'll check out early and get more beer. But any questions, you guys? Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a good question. So the question being, did I have a conversation with the vendor, a voice actual or a physical or otherwise? All of my conversations were via email. Every time I tried to give my phone number and say, hey, let's have a call, or is there a number I can reach you at, they either declined and said that they were working on stuff and they didn't want to talk quite yet, or we just never got to the point where they actually would give me contact details that would actually get to someone of importance. Their help desk and I would say their support staff was actually really responsive at first, way more responsive than the actual leadership at the company, which was kind of concerning. But yeah, unfortunately, I never actually got a conversation with those guys. Was there a question? Yeah. Oh, sure. Yeah. So I might as well actually, since I have like a couple of quick minutes, and of course I'm not on the actual Wi-Fi. What's the Circle City Wi-Fi password? Sorry. What? Hold on. I think I'm okay. There. Oh God. Oh look, LinkedIn. Good. Should have just mirrored it, right? All right. So that mostly fits on the screen. There you go. So I've done other IoT research since then, and kind of gotten down this road a little bit more, and the same kind of problems kept creeping up, which is no different than a lot of the research that you guys might be doing. But the last round of research I did actually went really poorly in terms of legal threats and other bad stuff, and so myself and then Zach Lanier, or you might know him better as Quine, we decided to start an initiative called Build It Securely. And effectively, we're doing two things. Number one is we're organizing resources for engineering staff. So if you're going to read like one iOS security paper, or one REST API slide deck, or something else, you can point people here and hopefully get some decent resources that are actually useful and will actually help build securely, build things more securely than most people are doing now. So education is one part. Part number two is we also are doing basically pro bono security research, like most of us do anyways, right? For vendors that are small commercial, bootstrapped, low-funded organizations, because the reality is a lot of the companies that are making IoT devices right now, you have never heard of. They're not Samsung, they're not Cisco, they're not Belkin. Most of the IoT devices coming to the market are very small organizations trying to get like a little piece of that pie, because you think of something like Arduino or Raspberry Pi or Gumsticks or all these different like small platforms. Very easy to build, very easy to deploy some software on. You have a 3D printer, you make a case for it, like you have an IoT device. Like it's very, very easy. So what we're doing is we're pairing up security researchers from honestly some of the best security researchers in the world. We have NCC Group, we have IOActive, we have Exhibitor. All these organizations have paired up with us, and effectively we're with BugCrowd giving vendors a direct line to researchers to then hopefully, in most cases, do pre-production security testing. So before you go to market with your IoT device, these researchers will test it, give you bugs for free. Maybe maybe you give them a T-shirt or like one of the pieces of hardware or something like whatever, just to say thanks. But effectively making it so it's not me testing hardware that I bought because I wanted to test it. We're flipping kind of the script and making it so vendors are opting in to having people research and do their devices. So really the benefit to the researchers is they still get to talk about the research. They get to go to conferences like this, not be threatened with legal action, not be threatened with C&Ds, and actually come and talk about the same important learnings that I just talked with you guys about today. So that's what we're up to with Build It Securely. And to the long roundabout answer is Dropcam. So Dropcam is a really cool company. I actually was out in San Francisco during RSA, sat down with their engineering staff, gave this slide deck and another slide deck about IoT security. They have a great security page. They have a great bounty program for public stuff. They're one of our first partners for Build It Securely. They actually have a new product coming out soon that we're going to get access to ahead of when it releases, so that hopefully by the time, and this is really the goal, hopefully by the time products come to market, they have been researched and looked at and reviewed and patched, rather than you guys buying 10,000 units and having to try to patch those after the fact. So that's what we're up to. It's gone very well. We started in February. We're actually just about to put hardware in researchers' hands from Pinocchio, which is a system on chip that's actually based out of Michigan. And then Dropcam has some stuff coming in July for us. So it's been successful. We obviously have, again, like a really good share of amazing people, way smarter than I am. And we're going down the right path to hopefully not probably change security for IoT, but certainly help some of the smaller brands and make it a little bit more easy to get the assistance to get to market more securely, and hopefully that kind of snowballs a little bit and see what happens. So sorry for taking up Q&A time. Any other questions? Yeah. This research, honestly, a lot of the IoT stuff you can get away with like, EtherCap and Wireshark. I mean, for all the network stuff, right? If you want to do more of the iOS stuff, again, like having IDA Pro or something or Hopper to do some of the analysis of the actual mobile image is useful. If I was going to do the hardware stuff, you probably want some hardware like JTAG if that's available, or like a logic analyzer. Yeah, most of the work, honestly, as you guys saw, like as soon as you got root on the thing, everything kind of collapsed for them. Because once you can see inside of the black box, it's not so much of a mystery anymore. Yeah, I wish I could say this is a lot like harder to do, but that's why I'm encouraging you guys to like buy some IoT crap or just stuff you already own and look at it, because honestly, you'll have at least some research stuff to get some free tickets to conferences, worst case, right? So it's not the worst way to live. But it is beneficial. You think of like that IP camera, they fixed all those vulnerabilities. Granted, like I had that camera, but I actually had also bought this camera for my brother, who has two like 6-month-old twins. Like, do I really want some creepy person looking at my nephews like from a camera on the internet? No, absolutely not. So it doesn't just have to be like cool hacker research project. Like it's bordering on altruism. Like you want to help people that can't help themselves. You want to tell people that they're in danger. You want to get things patched that people are paying $130 for and doesn't even have basic security. There's a lot of good that we can do in the community, and certainly other Hackers for Charity and Blood Code and all these other endeavors certainly have a much more primal benefit. But at the end of the day, like safety and privacy of citizens of our country is also a pretty damn good way to spend your time. So yeah, I really do encourage you guys to do some of these projects if you're already not. And I hope to see your slide decks in future events. Any last question? Cool. Well, thank you. Oh, sorry. Was it? Oh yeah, so we actually we've coordinated with the PR teams and everything else at these places. I'll actually be giving a talk at DEF CON, partially about this and then partially about more IoT stuff. And we're hoping just before that to have some kind of announcements and stuff go out publicly. And we've kind of kept it community based right now because we're still trying. Like the one thing that frustrates me as someone that's been in this industry a while, when people start a project or initiative like this and then say like, oh, we're going to be like huge and the best and 1,000 people should join us right now, and then it goes nowhere. We've grown really, really slowly with people that we trust, we know that have credibility, and we want to do things the right way, not the quick way. And so, by DEF CON time, we should have some cool news about like, developer or researchers looking at hardware like that. Probably put out a press release with some of these companies like NCC Group, IOActive, Dropcam, Pinocchio, and so on and so forth. Because it makes them look good too, right? Like they're the only IP camera vendor on our page, right? So if you're going to buy an IP camera and you care about security, here's a great reference point for that. Or you're going to buy a system on chip and you want to do stuff with that. Look at Pinocchio, right? Because they care about security. And so that's kind of the peer pressure thing I'm hoping for. I'm hoping that we get enough vendors in enough spaces that when we're, people are like you guys are giving out recommendations on what IP camera should I buy. I would hope you would say something like Dropcam because you know that they're serious about security and that they're working with built securely. Like that's a good recommendation to make at that point. So that's I think it's beneficial to everyone. Like there's no one that really loses in the scenario. Researchers get to do research and not have to worry about legal bullshit and get to give talks. BugCrowd gets a huge reputation boost because they're doing all this for free for us. Our researchers individually get the cred for doing the work. The companies that employ those researchers get cred for letting them do the work. And then, of course, the vendors get good cred for being security-conscious vendors. So, you rarely find opportunities with so much upside to it, and it's pretty cool to be a part of. So, great. Well, thanks so much, guys. Enjoy the rest of the conference.